talks, and without further ado, we'll get started with the next one. I'd like to introduce Dick Brooks, speaking on how to prepare for the SEC cybersecurity rules before December 2023. So Dick, take it away.
Thank you, Roman. Can you guys hear me okay out there? Okay, super. So Jim, thank you for taking us into the exciting world of AI. I'm going to take you into the less exciting world of regulations. Yeah, everyone try to contain yourselves now. But let me just go ahead and get started here. So as Roman said, my name is Dick Brooks. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for Reliable Energy Analytics. We're a very small software engineering firm that's been around since 2018, located in Westfield, Massachusetts. We're the developer of cybersecurity risk assessment tools. Our main product is called the Software Assurance Guardian Pointman. And when people ask me, what exactly does REA do? And I have to use an analogy. So have you seen the movie Titanic? You guys seen the Titanic? You know the guys who were up there in the bird nest looking for icebergs? The ones who are looking for risk, that's us. That's what we do. We look for risks in the software supply chain. And so that's largely what our company does. And we work for companies to help them identify those risks proactively. I'm also very active on some CISA initiatives. The Critical Manufacturing Sector Coordinating Council is one that might be of interest to some folks here. We have a tabletop exercise coming up. But let me get down into what's really going on here. So the SEC has been talking about cybersecurity regulations for a couple of years now. And so last year, they sort of let people know, look, we're getting serious about this. Directors and officers are going to be held responsible. And so those rules are now codified in the Code of Federal Regulations, and they take effect in December of this year. And so what it means is the big change that's being presented is when a cyber incident occurs, a material cyber incident, and I'll get into that in a minute, you have 4 days to report it on an 8K. So it's important to know when does the clock start ticking on the 4 days. And that's an area that's getting a lot of discussion these days, but I'll offer you some thoughts on that as well. But the other thing they do is they require officers and directors to take direct ownership for cybersecurity processes. And they require that information to be shown in a public disclosure called the Form 10K. So what that means is that before, officers and directors could say, gee, I wasn't aware that we didn't have cybersecurity processes in place. So when a cyber incident occurred, they had sort of a way of saying, you know, don't blame me, I wasn't aware. So that all changes in December. Now the disclosures will need to identify the officers and directors in their responsibilities for these regulations. So if you're in the cybersecurity business, you're no longer left out hanging alone to dry. You now have in the boat with you a couple of officers and directors to be right by your side. And yes, sir.
This is not CISOs, these is the entire organization's C-levels that are now responsible for this.
Directors and officers is the way they describe it. So if you're on the board of directors, you will have to disclose in your Form 10K what role you play in terms of oversight. And if you're a manager or an officer, you will need to disclose what your role is with regard to cybersecurity. This is a huge difference. So I apologize for this. I know it's a hard one to see, but this came right out of a Harvard Law School article that I thought was really good. It basically boils down what I just told you. The first one is that there's the disclosure requirements in a Form 10K. As you can see, that registrants must describe their processes for assessment, identification, and management of material risks from cybersecurity threats. And this is where the officers and directors need to be the owners of that process. As you can see in item 106C, it says, describe the board's oversight and management's role in assessing. So to this gentleman's question, it is very direct in putting the officers and directors in the driver's seat on cybersecurity. A Form 8K is also required as a means to report on a cyber incident. Many people, I'm sure many of us know that a lot of cyber incidents occur and you never hear about them. The ransom is paid and it goes on silently. That won't be the case anymore. With these new regulations, companies will be required to report a cyber incident within 4 business days. So with this talk, the goal of this talk is really to describe the processes and practices for cyber risk detection within the software supply chain. And here I'm very precise. Software supply chain is just one aspect or one of the avenues that can be used to carry out a cyber attack. So that's what the focus is here today. And we'll also talk a little bit about the need to preserve evidence that those practices are in fact in use. If you say they're in use and you can't prove they're in use, then you may have a little bit of challenge. Yes, sir.
You may get this. What is the requirements around public? Is it reported to the government? Is there a level of confidentiality that's guaranteed with reporting to the government, or is there an expectation that the incident will actually make its way to the public that the incident occurred?
Okay, good question, sir. So the answer is that a Form 8K, which is how you report an incident, is public. And the regulation is very clear in this regard, in telling you don't put technical details in the public disclosure. The requirement is to give information to shareholders that would be considered material and they're making an investment decision. So is it going to have a financial impact? That's going to be in the Form 8K. Are you going to disclose what your incident response plan is? No, definitely not. So that's a big difference here, is that 8K is public and you need to make sure that the information that you share is indeed worthy or for public use.
8K is what is your policy? You're supposed to report an actual incident.
Yes, sir. Yes.
That's not 8K. The 8K is not the actual incident, right?
No, the 8K is the form used to report an incident.
Right. Oh, it is?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're pretty, in fact, if I knew how to go back, I could show you that. But you see the third bullet down here, I can't really point to it, but you see right here is the Form 8K, registrants disclose their incidents on the 8K.
Cool, thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions on that, guys? Because that one's been getting a lot of airtime these days. Okay. The other question I get a lot is, how long does it take to implement these practices for cybersecurity, software supply chain risk detection? And I'll get into that as well. And I do want to point out that the SEC disclosures require much more than what I'm covering here today, guys. I'm only really talking about the software supply chain, but there are other processes you will need to disclose in your Form 10K that go beyond what I've got here for you today. I go into a little bit of that. So the key message for you today is that management is responsible for cybersecurity. You are no longer left alone to hang out when a cyber incident occurs. You got someone right there in the boat with you. Yay. But now they're just going to tell you what to do, not going to help you much, but they're going to tell you what to do. But one of the keys here, and this is an area that a lot of people, at least what I've found, aren't really covering their bases, is in this area known as CISA, known exploited vulnerabilities. So one of the critical keys to understand with these risks is that they need to be considered, what the lawyers call, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a software engineer, they call it prima facie evidence of real cyber risk. And so what KEVs are, prima facie evidence of real cyber risk. These are real software supply chain exploits that are being used in the wild that have been observed to be successful in the wild. So they are real risks. And now directors and officers can be held personally liable in a shareholder lawsuit in the event of a cyber incident. That's the other thing that happens with this information. The 8K tells the shareholder that an incident has occurred within 4 days of it happening. And then they can go look at the processes that were used by that company to see if they were doing all the right stuff. And if they weren't doing the right stuff, then that's opening the company up and the officers themselves for a lawsuit called a Caremark lawsuit that could seek to hold them personally liable when those incidents occur. And you think like, okay, the stock price dropped, that'd be something a shareholder might want to, sue for in terms of recovering their losses. And again, I'm not a lawyer, so.
Is holding the directors of the organization personally liable a standard thing in the industry, or is this the first time that the shareholders, like not cybersecurity, but in general for stock price dropping, is this a standard you can hold the directors liable, personally liable, or is it only in cyber now that you can hold them personally liable?
So I don't know about other things like if the house burns down,
Right.
but within the context of cybersecurity, we have actual evidence, real lawsuits that have occurred. Home Depot back in 2015 had an incident where they had stolen data, and it resulted in some pretty significant losses to shareholders, and they did have a Caremark lawsuit. Now, it did not prevail. I don't know all the details about why it didn't prevail, but with this information that the SEC is now demanding, it may be a little bit more difficult to wiggle your way out of a lawsuit if indeed all of your disclosure is out there of what you are doing to prevent cyber attacks, and then reporting that the cyber attack actually occurred. It raises the bar a little bit. The other thing that seems to be happening, I'm not a lawyer, but the other thing is apparently cyber insurers, maybe my friends here from Aon will say something at the back, they're starting to do some checking to see if companies are indeed following regulations before they will issue cyber insurance policies. That's correct, right, sir?
As far as I know, I'm not part of the broking team, but as far as I know, yes.
Yeah. So here's another case where these new regulations, not only can you be subject to a shareholder lawsuit, but you may find it's required in order just to get your cyber insurance policies through the loop. So there's a few things that are tied to this that you may want to consider. Okay, so as I mentioned, you're going to need to document the processes in these disclosures in a Form 10K, and then you have 4 days to report on the incidents when they do occur. And it's vitally important that you maintain tamper-proof evidence that these controls are in fact being implemented. So this is one that gets a lot of airtime too. Cyber risk is business risk. And you can ask either of these two guys, I don't have Caesars up here, but they would also, I think, be willing to stand on the line and tell you that they experience it as well. As I think a lot of people are aware what happened with MGM recently and Clorox as well. They had to announce in a filing, in an 8K filing, that they were also going to suffer from losses. There is just as proof of this is there is a Caesars lawsuit that is underway right now. You can see it was filed back on the 15th of September. And as far as I have heard, firsthand knowledge, I've heard there are now 5 lawsuits that have been filed with regard to the 2 casinos. So remember I said that cybersecurity is very broad. It's also very deep. So the regulations and the processes for cybersecurity go beyond just software supply chain. And you look at the NIST CSF, and it gives you a sense for just how broad it really is and how deep you need to be aware of these risks and the processes you need to put in place, which are basically around what this CSF attempts to describe for you, a framework for where to place your processes. This is an eye chart on purpose, guys. What's on line 17? Anyone see that here? Anyway, okay, so you're probably familiar with the attack framework, the MITRE attack framework. This is just more proof to show you this is a very broad and very deep problem that needs to be addressed. And this is why you need to ensure that your disclosures contain enough information to show that you're doing your due diligence across the board. So as I said, the software supply chain is just one area to cover. CISA KEVs are essentially that prima facie evidence or proof that cyber risks in the software supply chain are real. And so it's imperative that that companies look at this software supply chain and have processes to detect those risks. Remember the icebergs? That's what this is about. It's someone out there, in this case, CISA has said, hey guys, we see an iceberg. It's about 20 miles in front of you, but you're being told about it right now so that you can take preventative action. Now, there are other risks in the software supply chain, like software supplier risks. We all know what happened with SolarWinds and how they were using offshore engineering teams to develop software, and they got banged with that. But there are other concerns as well, like provenance and use of open source software. And the other thing too is important, and actually CISA just made a major announcement this week about vulnerability disclosure. Companies are going to need to disclose their vulnerabilities within a certain time frame. And so this is becoming an even more important matter. CISA has been authorized to create regulations, not regulations, but recommendations to implement a law called CERCIA, which is an incident reporting law that has been announced recently to specify that it's a 3-day reporting requirement. So SEC has 4 days, but CERCIA may trump that with 3 days. This is a slide that I was given permission to show from the Augusta group, which I thought was really excellent. It goes to that point about having multiple avenues that you need to address, or multiple functional areas when you are describing your process disclosures for cybersecurity. So you can see supply chain is one, vulnerability and patch is another, but there are many others. Incident recovery is a great example of one here, where you need to be able to show that you actually have an incident response plan in place. Otherwise, you'll get dinged again because you failed to have something reasonable in place. So I love this slide because it feels like this sometimes. These CVEs come at us like a swarm of mosquitoes. And so knowing which ones you should focus on is important. And that's what the CISA KEVs do, is they tell you of all the CVEs crossing your desk, which ones are the ones that are most likely to cause problems or risk in your environment. And so they give us that early warning system. I think of as a Doppler radar to say, this thing is coming at you and it's really causing damage. So you need to take action now. So what does a typical process look like? And it has a lot. Are people familiar with the term SBOM here? SBOM, software bill of materials, good. Yeah, Alan Friedman has been out banging the drums for years about this. So yeah, so it's gotten a lot of mainstream attention. But it is a key point because it describes all the components, or at least hopefully describes all the components in a software product. And with that information, you're able to conduct a risk assessment. So you can do things like, look for CISA KEVs at the component level. And you can, you need to be able to verify the provenance, and that's where, verifying the download location of where you acquire a software package from is part of the evidence that needs to be preserved so that you can show parties that you actually did do this provenance check as part of your process. But you also have other steps. These aren't as automated. Like, for example, vendor verification is one. You want to know what cybersecurity practices and policies your software vendor is implementing. You want to know that they've done their due diligence as well and are working to protect your interest in the software they're providing to you. So knowing what their SDLC processes and practices are is also important so that you can assess the level of risk that they may be introducing into your environment. And after you've done all of these checks, you need to preserve your evidence. And then eventually you get to the point of saying, okay, do we have a material incident here? Because that's where the regulations come into play. And you need to, determine whether or not you have a material incident. Now, some of these are easier than others to determine, right? The two most common cyber incidents that I'm aware of are ransomware and data theft. And the beautiful thing about both of those, if you can say beautiful, is that number one, the hackers, the perpetrators tell you when they've introduced you, a breach into your environment, they've attacked you and they've succeeded. And number two, they give you a ransom note that tells you how much you need to pay in order to solve the problem. So here we have two things, and this goes back to that 4-day trigger. Number one, you're notified you have the event. And number two, they tell you the cost to recover from that event, or at least get your keys back, the keys to decipher or decrypt the data. So here you have the two things that are required to report a cyber incident with the SEC. You know that it occurred, and you know that it's material because the ransom note tells you what the material impact is. So that's where the 4-day clock really starts ticking. This just goes through a little bit of the chain of evidence, the chain of custody for preserving tamper-proof evidence. Basically, once you create your risk assessment evidence data, you want to make sure that it's preserved in a tamper-proof format so that you can present that in court. If the day comes when your directors and officers are facing a lawsuit, you're going to want to present this evidence using a third party that says, this party is testifying on our behalf that we have produced this evidence of our processes.
Is there any?
Yes, sir.
Is there any guidance on what that evidence looks like, right? And is that evidence only provided to the public, during discovery in a lawsuit?
So I think the answer to the second question about discovery in a lawsuit is yes. I don't think that's public. As far as what to report, this has been another area of concern. If you look in the SEC regulations, in the comments that were received, people were looking for a safe harbor amendment. So they were looking for something that said, if I do A, B, and C, do I get out of jail card by doing those? That would be the evidence. Show me the A, B, and C. And the SEC waved their hands on this and said, oh, no, we're not going to give you that. You just do the right thing, or what they call good faith compliance, and show us that you are, which means you really kind of take it upon yourselves to say, what do we think we need to do to cover our bases? So unfortunately, I don't have a good answer for you there, but neither did the SEC, so I don't feel so bad.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yet they made it 4 days, the deadline. I mean, they had, it's kind of where they come up with that threshold where that's ample amount of time. Some people would want to say require event. Am I really hacked, or am I really, some third party come in, and that could take time. So where did this 4 days come from?
Yeah, no, that's another great question, actually. Why and where did they come up with it? Yeah. And the best as I can tell, you can read the regulation yourself to try and read those tea leaves. The best as I can tell is they want to try to limit the amount of time insiders will have to take advantage of selling off their positions if an incident occurs. So by reducing the amount of time they have to report, reduces the amount of time they can actually try to take advantage of that situation. That's my reading, sir. I would suggest you read the document yourself. It's not a very exciting read, let me just say that right now. But you know, if you're suffering from insomnia, it'll solve the problem. Yeah. Okay.
They define what a cyber incident is, like a certain amount, like, does a certain amount of data need to be leaked? Is it like if a single user's, like, if just a single user gets their data leaked, is that sufficient to trigger one of these events?
Yeah. Man, you should work at the SEC, I'm just telling you.
I've been told I would make a good lawyer, but.
Well, I'm kind of thinking that was good advice. So they don't go into that detail. What they say is it's up to each party to determine what is material. Okay, you determine what is material.
Ooh, that
Yeah.
sounds like it's fraught with abuse and or people being like, you didn't consider this material, so you like. Yeah.
I think they're really good at hedging their own bets.
Yeah.
Because they kind of want to come back and say, well, you didn't do this. Well, you didn't tell me. Well, you should have known, you know? So, but there is some guidance coming on that. Is John from, who was it, Rockwell Automation, I think, is he here? Anyways, he was asking me earlier. So there is some guidance that's being worked on right now. The FAIR organization, you know, you probably heard of FAIR Isaac and FICO scores, that's those guys. They are, in fact, they have a new recommendation out this week, and comments are due, I think the deadline is today, for this new way of determining materiality. And so FAIR is going to give you, hopefully, the guidance you need to answer that very question. We'll see.
Question, they still have that exception if law enforcement is doing active investigation and public disclosure will, interfere with the investigation, that they don't need to disclose publicly.
Okay, so that tells me this lady is the one who actually read the regulation. Yeah, yes, ma'am, that is in there. There is up to a 60-day deferral in the event that an incident could have some national, security implications. But yes, that is in there. What's on page 43? You gotta have fun with this stuff. You'll go nuts if you're not having fun with this stuff, let me tell you. Anyways, I'm gonna move on, guys. So how long does it take at a minimum level to get something in place? And from our experience, you can usually get it done in a week at a minimal level. And I emphasize minimal, because if you have 5,000 software assets in your inventory, it's going to take you more than a week to implement a supply chain risk management process that addresses those. So, you can have something up and running in a week. You can get some evidence stored in a week. And, you can do this without the help of a software vendor. This is a really important point. Software vendors haven't been very forthcoming with their SBOMs. And so what we've had to do in our software is we've had to try and sort of decipher the binaries to try and figure out what stuff is in there. And so the first step that our software does is it does an introspection and produces what it thinks is an SBOM. And then it uses that to drive the rest of the process. So this emphasis about without help from a software vendor is key, because if we had to wait for the software vendor, it'd probably be months. All right. So how am I doing on time, Roman?
I got 2 more minutes.
Oh, man. Okay. All right. Well, so it's important that you do the right thing here. You go out and get your disclosures. Make sure you're covering all the bases. Make sure you have a method to preserve your evidence just in case you need it. I want to point out one thing here that I think is one of the most valuable things I have seen recently, and that's this right here. Watch the Joe Sullivan interview. Joe Sullivan is the Uber CISO that was convicted as a result of a cyber incident. He has some really insightful stuff. Listen to that. It's only 40 minutes, And you can actually skip the first 20 because the meat and potatoes is actually in the last 20 minutes. This is from the actual enforcement entity themselves, SEC's David Hirsch. He's the enforcement guy over at SEC. He's basically saying what I said to this gentleman earlier. You're going to want to do the right thing, and this is what he means. Just show us you're trying. I will say, if you're going into December and you haven't put something in place, this is your strategy. So I wouldn't be counting on the mercy of hackers. The last thing I want to mention too, I work with this organization, CIS's Critical Manufacturing Sector Coordinating Council, and they're hosting a tabletop exercise in Seattle on October 17th. This is one of those cases where you're going to get to see deep inside what you need to be thinking about when it comes to cybersecurity incidents. And so the good folks over there at the CMSCC they're working with the FBI and others to get this done. Roman, how'd I do?
Awesome. Got a few more minutes for questions if you'd like.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to take any questions. Was it more interesting than the AI stuff? Probably not. It's regulations. Well, come on. Yes, sir.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
I'm sorry.
Previous slide.
Oh, previous slide. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to copy down.
Yeah.
I presume this only applies to publicly traded companies. It does not apply to privately traded companies or like other entities in any capacity.
The SEC regulations apply to public companies and foreign entities that are doing business.
Oh, and
So it's,
foreign?
yes. Look, well, I'd go back. That slide where I showed you that gray slide, that I didn't go down into the details like the Form 20, that's all the foreign entities have to do. They call them FPIs. They have to also comply with this.
So if they're doing business, if they're a foreign entity doing business in the United States, they must comply with it.
I think there are other criteria, but approximately yes. Read the regulation. That's the best answer. Yeah, so it is public companies, but it's also foreign companies as well.
Back one more slide. I want
Oh.
to see so that got busted. No, oh, sorry, one more.
One more. You don't want to see the Goodyear blimp?
I won't shoot. Oh, one more. I'm sorry.
No problem, Roman. Whatever you need.
There we go.
Yeah, Joe Sullivan's, his interview is incredibly insightful, guys. If you take nothing else from this talk, take away that you really need to watch his interview, because he really gets down into the real risks you face. And he's talking from experience. He's a convicted felon. So he's not just making this stuff up. He's telling you his experiences from having gone through it. It's really insightful.
Awesome.
Anything else?
That's it. Thank you.
No, thanks very much. Thank you. And thanks for coming out in this awful weather. It's terrible out there, so thanks for traveling.